What if a single message was powerful enough to shake an entire fandom, redraw invisible lines in the sand, and force everyone to ask the same forbidden question: what really happened behind the scenes? Right now, right before the next revelation, is your chance to stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story, another shocking twist, or another unforgettable journey. For years, DyShen has lived in a sacred space. A love story shaped by timing, chemistry, and the kind of quiet intimacy fans swear you cannot fake. Dylan Wang and Shen Yue were not just co-stars. They were a symbol, a promise, a story fans guarded fiercely, convinced that some connections are too real to be coincidence. And then, without warning, a name resurfaced. Bai Lu. Not in a rumor, not in a blurry photo, not in a whispered leak, but in a message. A message sent to Shen Yue. A message that has now ignited debates, divided loyalties, and left DyShen fans staring at their screens in stunned silence. Because the question is no longer whether Bai Lu reached out. The question is why now? The documentary lens pulls back to reveal the context. Bai Lu, a star in her own right, admired, respected, and once closely associated with Dylan Wang in the public imagination. Their chemistry on screen had sparked its own following, its own theories, its own alternate universe of what could have been. But over time, those discussions faded. Or so everyone thought. Until that message surfaced. Sources close to the situation describe it as calm, measured, and deeply personal. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Which somehow made it even more unsettling. It was not a confrontation. It was not a warning. It was a statement. A reaching out across an invisible line that had never been crossed before. And Shen Yue read it. Imagine that moment. Late at night. A phone lighting up. A familiar name. A pause before opening the message. Because when you are at the center of a story watched by millions, even a single sentence carries weight. Especially when it comes from someone whose history is layered with unspoken meaning. The content of the message, according to insiders, was respectful, almost gentle. Bai Lu reportedly acknowledged Shen Yue directly, not as a rival, not as a rumor, but as a person. She spoke about timing, about understanding, about emotions that do not always disappear just because the world moves on. And that is where everything changed. Because DyShen fans were not prepared for nuance. They were not prepared for maturity. They were not prepared for the possibility that behind the polished smiles and public silence, real conversations were happening quietly, privately, and without the audience's permission. The fandom reacted instantly. Screenshots flew across platforms. Translations multiplied. Interpretations spiraled. Some fans saw grace. Others saw tension disguised as courtesy. A few saw heartbreak hiding between the lines. And many asked the question no one wanted to ask out loud. Was this closure, or a door left slightly open? Shen Yue's response, or rather her lack of a public response, only deepened the mystery. No statement. No denial. No reassurance. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels intentional. The kind that suggests thought rather than avoidance. Those close to Shen Yue describe her as composed, thoughtful, and emotionally intelligent. Someone who understands the cost of every word she releases into the world. Her decision not to react publicly was not weakness. It was control. Because sometimes the loudest answer is choosing not to perform your emotions for anyone. Meanwhile, Dylan Wang remained equally quiet. And that silence became its own narrative. Fans dissected old interviews, rewatched past moments, looked for signs they might have missed. A glance held too long. A smile that lingered. A pause before a question was answered. The documentary voice lowers here because this is where the story stops being about gossip and starts being about people. 3 individuals. 3 careers. 3 emotional timelines that do not necessarily align with public expectations. Bai Lu's message was not an attack. But it was not insignificant either. It was a reminder that feelings do not expire on schedule. That admiration can coexist with respect. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak directly, privately, and without an audience. And that is why DyShen fans cannot believe this. Not because of jealousy, not because of fear, but because the illusion of simplicity has been broken. Love stories are rarely clean. They are rarely linear. And they are almost never as straightforward as the headlines want them to be. As the screen fades to black, one final question lingers in the air. Was Bai Lu's message a final goodbye, or the last honest sentence in a story the public was never meant to read? And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all, some stories do not end with answers. They end with understanding. And yet, the story does not end there. Because when a message is sent, it does not simply vanish after it is read. It lingers. It echoes. It reshapes the emotional landscape in ways no one can fully predict. In the days that followed, subtle shifts began to surface. Not announcements, not confirmations, but changes so quiet that only the most attentive fans noticed. Shen Yue appeared calmer, more reserved in public appearances. Her smiles were still there, but they carried a softness that felt introspective, as if part of her was turned inward, processing something deeply personal. Those who know her well described a woman grounded in clarity, someone who listens more than she speaks when something matters. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly happened. Not heated arguments, not dramatic confrontations, but honest discussions. The kind that strip away assumptions and replace them with truth. Because when past emotions resurface, even in the most respectful form, they demand to be acknowledged. Bai Lu, for her part, did not seek attention afterward. No cryptic posts, no interviews, no subtle hints meant to stir curiosity. She stepped back into silence, and that silence spoke volumes. It suggested that the message was never meant for the public. It was not a move. It was not strategy. It was a human moment, sent quietly, with no expectation of applause or backlash. And that may be the most unsettling part for fans. There was no villain. There was no betrayal. Just three adults navigating the complicated reality of shared history under an unforgiving spotlight. DyShen fans found themselves caught between loyalty and empathy. Some clung tighter than ever to the idea of Dylan Wang and Shen Yue as an unshakable bond, reading strength into every moment of restraint. Others began to acknowledge a more complex truth, that admiration from the past does not automatically disappear, and that respect between women does not always fit the dramatic narratives fans expect. This was not a love triangle unfolding in public. This was closure attempting to exist in private. And perhaps that is why it feels so jarring. Because fandoms thrive on certainty, on labels, on endings that are loud and unmistakable. What they were given instead was ambiguity, emotional maturity, silence where noise was expected. As the documentary lens widens, it becomes clear that the real story is not about rivalry or jealousy. It is about emotional honesty in an industry that rarely allows it. About the courage to speak without demanding something in return. About the wisdom to listen without reacting impulsively. Shen Yue did not respond publicly because she did not need to. Her life, her choices, and her emotional boundaries are not a performance. Dylan Wang did not step in because sometimes the most respectful thing is to let two people speak for themselves without interference. And Bai Lu sent that message not to disrupt, but to resolve something quietly within herself. The aftermath has left DyShen fans changed. More cautious, more reflective, less willing to accept simple narratives. Because once you see the human side of these stories, it becomes harder to reduce them to slogans and hashtags. As the final moments of this chapter settle, one truth becomes undeniable. Not every shocking moment is meant to explode. Some are meant to close a chapter gently. And in the stillness that follows Bai Lu's message to Shen Yue, the world is reminded of something easy to forget. Behind every headline is a heartbeat. Behind every rumor is a real conversation. And behind every silence is a choice. The screen fades, not with an answer, but with a realization. Some stories are not meant to be owned by the audience. They are meant to be lived by the people inside them.